Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and get started. We'll just start with some brief housekeeping items. So hello and good afternoon. For those of who I have not had the pleasure of meeting, my name is Lori Jacobs and I'm the Director of Public Relations. I see there are a few community members here with us today. Welcome, and we're happy to have you here. We encourage you to glean as much as you can from this presentation, and keep in mind that the slides were created for DEHAP participating landlords. We look forward to hosting more webinars and sharing additional information specifically for program participants and partners in the future. As I mentioned, my name is Lori, and I am joined here with members of the DEHAP team who you will hear from in the next half an hour to 45 minutes. Out of respect for your time, I do want to get started right now and just want everyone to know that you have been muted for this presentation. However, we invite your questions and comments through the chat. They will be answered throughout the presentation as well as at the end during a Q&A period. You also have the opportunities to submit questions on your registration form. We have received those and we'll get to them during the Q&A period as well. If we do not get to your questions this afternoon, or your questions are specific to an individual scenario or case, we'll be sending out a follow-up email that will capture the Q&A and provide responses and referrals as needed. This presentation is being recorded, so please be respectful and considerate of others on the webinar while providing questions or comments. The recording, as well as the PowerPoint presentation, will be shared in the previously mentioned follow-up email, as well as on the agency's COVID-19 resource website, which I will drop into the chat so that it is available to all. By the end of this presentation, we truly hope you feel empowered and knowledgeable about the DEHAP program and processes. The agenda will include a brief update on the program, recommended tips and tricks for landlords, and ample time for question and answer. At this time, I'm going to hand the floor over to the lovely DEHAP team to discuss the DEHAP program and recent updates. Just let me unmute you, Marva.
Thank you, Lori. Thanks to everybody for attending today. My name is Marva Hammond. I am the DEHAP Operations Manager, and we're going to go through a little bit of history of the DEHAP program, what it does, what it's for, who it can help, and best practices. And we can start out with a general overview of what is DEHAP. DEHAP is a rental and utility assistance program for Delaware renters. And it's basically a program to assist individuals in our state that were affected by COVID-19 due to either a shutdown of their employer. They may have had to take time off of work due to illness of themselves or a family member. They could have had reduced hours or some sort of hardship, anything related to COVID-19. So how can DEHAP help? So DEHAP can help in a number of different ways. It can cover rent, and under rent charges, we can pay late fees, we can pay utilities that are associated with that property, we can pay court fees, and we can pay some other different fees. So if they have like an insurance fee for renter's insurance, if they have trash fees, garbage fees, we can pay those. We also have the ability to pay forward rent. So when an application is submitted, we have the ability to pay 3 months in advance, as well as late rent and current rent. We can also pay security deposits. We'll go into that a little bit later on in the presentation. But if you have a tenant that is moving in and they'd like to utilize the rental assistance program, we're able to pay security and those first 3 months of rent. And again, with the utilities, we can pay utilities that are listed on the lease as responsible for the tenant to pay. And our maximum payments for this program are we will pay a maximum of $2,000 in rent, and we will pay up to 18 months in rent. And for utilities, we can pay a maximum of $1,500 monthly, and there is an 18-month limit on that as well. So how can DEHAP help? So currently we have made some significant change assistance in the state of Delaware. You can see the numbers here. I'm not going to go over those with you, but you can clearly see that the money that has come in through our state has been allocated in many different ways. We are proud to say that we have assisted landlords and tenants in keeping individuals housed and keeping their utilities on. So, I mean, I don't need to read the numbers, but they speak for themselves. So the eligibility for our tenants. So eligible tenants. So if you go to our website, there's a bunch of information. So I'm going to encourage everybody on this call to go to our website. I think Lori's going to put that in the chat for everybody, but it has all of this information. But I'm going to kind of go over it, so it's more of it's just base knowledge for you. So regarding our income requirements, they're listed below. We're 80% median income, which is really, really high. Typically for these programs, they're a lot lower. So we are proud to say that we have offered this as 80%. One or more individuals that are in the household need to have experienced a reduction in income. They have to have experienced a risk of homelessness or housing instability. And that's basically if their rent is non-affordable to them. And again, the income is 80%, and that is listed on this slide. And you can also find that on our website. So the application process. So basically, the application is there's a link on our website, and we utilize a portal. The portal can work in two different ways. Either the tenant can apply for assistance or the landlord can apply. So either the tenant or the landlord submits an application. That application is then sent to our team for review and audit, and then the application is either approved or denied. And I know that a lot of folks that are on this call are kind of here because they have questions about that in between process of what happens between their submission of documents or there's tenant submission of documents and that approval or denial. So we're going to kind of walk through some of those steps and best practices for getting your cases approved really quickly and on the first audit. So what do we need from you as the landlord? So our landlords are going to need to provide us with a W-9, their direct deposit information. We also have the ability to pay you by a paper check. I will say if you choose the check option, it takes a lot longer for the check to be received. The checks are mailed out from Texas, so it may take you a lot longer. And we're going to need information on the property and a rent ledger and a past due statement. There is a difference between that rent ledger and past due statement. Some individuals will say, well, my tenant is not late or on their rent. Our program is for individuals that either are late on their rent or, like I said, we can use it for current and future rent. So we do need to see that rent ledger that shows us, like, if they're late, it's going to show us payments that are due. If they're not late, it's going to show what's been paid, so that we kind of can see what the history of this tenant's payments have been. For our tenants, we're going to need a couple documents as well. We're going to need to see proof of identification. So we're going to need to see a photo ID. We have a list of documents here that can also be found on our website. And just to note, if you have a tenant and they have ID and their ID does not match the property address, we are going to ask for some additional documents, a piece of official mail with their address on it. If we have a security deposit case where obviously the tenant's address is not going to match the photo ID, they can upload a document that just says this is a new unit that they're moving into. And we are going to need income documents. So the traditional income documents could be, 30 days worth of pay stubs. We can use proof of like an award letter for their benefits award letter, their social security awards letter, anything like that. But most easily, we also have a form that they can fill out that will allow them to fill in what income is coming into the household. And we need them to fill out that document with income for all adults in the household. If that adult is in the household and they're not working, they can list them and put that their income is 0. We are also going to need a copy of the signed lease or something that lets us know that there's some sort of a landlord-tenant relationship. The lease can be expired because we understand that in the state of Delaware, once a lease expires, you then move into a month-to-month lease. But if you're in a month-to-month lease, we're going to need something that shows if there's been an increase of rent, we're going to have to see something from both the landlord and tenant that they had agreed to that increase in rent. So some of our common issues that we run into where we get calls and, either the landlord or tenant is trying to figure out why the application hasn't moved forward. A lot of times it's because the tenant has not fully submitted the application. So they're going through the portal, they're uploading documents, and they haven't clicked on the submit button. So the application is kind of just sitting out there and it hasn't really moved forward. Or they may not have included all household members on the application. So as I said, regarding income, we need all adults listed on that income form, even if their income is zero. And there's also not including all required documents. So, we went through a list of what those documents were. If they haven't submitted all of those documents, then that case is not able to be approved on the first audit because there's missing documents, which either we've requested or we're waiting for. And then again, the address on the ID does not match the property. And we need other proof of residence, such as the utility bill or a piece of official mail. So those are some of the key things that if you have a tenant that is, has submitted an application and it hasn't moved forward, you want them to go into the portal and make sure that they have submitted all of these documents. Some of our landlord challenges that we see where, the case is kind of not moving forward. Again, that submit button. So we'll look at that in a little bit. But when you're in the portal, you're going to go through and do all of the steps. And there's also a submit button. If you don't hit that submit button, then it's not going to move forward. Not updating your ledger on recertifications. So if you have a tenant that's been using the program and they're recertifying for their next 3 months of rent, you need to upload the most recent rent ledger, even if you were paid and they're current on their rent and you were paid via DEHAP, we need to see the ledger that shows that they're current on those payments. Not getting linked to a tenant application. So sometimes what will happen is we will have a tenant that enters the incorrect email address for you. If you're a private landlord, it's a little bit easier. You may just have one email address and you're managing your DEHAP application for that one property, or you may have 3 properties. So the email address is just for you. And so you should be getting those applications sent to you. If you're a larger landlord, you're going to need to make sure that the tenants that are applying have the person in your organization that manages those applications. We've seen where a tenant has put in an email address and it's for somebody else that they email at your site, or they've missed a letter. Those are all things that you want to communicate with your tenants, making sure that they have the correct information. My recommendation, especially if you're a larger landlord, is to have a document or something that you send to your tenants, maybe with their rent, that says, if you're applying for the DEHAP program, this is the email and contact information for your DEHAP application. Ledger detail, not that common, but sometimes we may get a ledger that doesn't have enough information for us to be able to determine what is due. And again, with that ledger, we're going to need it to be clear and concise and by month, and we need detail. So you can't say if your rent is $1,000 and you're charging $40 in late fees, you can't say that there's $1,040 due for July 7th. You need to say for July, it's due $1,000 in rent and $40 for late charges. So you're going to need to break out the fees that you're associating with that month. Your W-9 and EIN number not validating. Not very common. It can happen occasionally. When you put in your EIN number, and if it's put in incorrectly, that will get sent back to us and it will not validate. So sometimes you'll have to work with us to maybe determine how you need to enter your EIN number associated with that rental property. And your owner name on property tab must exactly match your IRS and W-9. So again, when we're looking at the property, there's a couple things that need to match. The property tab, it's going to have to show the owner of record. So we're going to look at that parcel search. That parcel search should match whoever is on that W-9. So if you have questions, where can you go? So we have our fabulous website, the decovidhousinghelp.com. And that's where you're going to go for general information, how-tos, best practices, documents. If you don't have a ledger, you can go to our website and download just a general ledger and use that. You can contact our call center at 866-935-0407. And that call center is able to give generalized information. They are not able to give you detailed information because they can't see a lot. But what they can do is look at your case and tell you what is missing, what is needed. If they tell you that something is needed, even if you feel like you've already submitted it, submit it again. A lot of times that will get that case moving forward. And we also are working with some excellent community navigators. They are throughout the state of Delaware. You can find a list of those on our website. And the community navigators are individuals that will help your tenants with submitting their application if they're having challenges with getting that application submitted. So I definitely and highly recommend that you utilize the community navigators for your tenants that need a little bit more assistance. So as I said, the community navigators, they're in all 3 counties. They do provide translation services. And unlike our call center or our in-house DSHA staff, they can do in-person meetings and virtual meetings with your tenant. So if your tenant needs them to come to their home, some of the organizations will come to the tenant, or they can schedule for that tenant to come to them with the documents, and they'll get those applications submitted to us. So some of our tips and tricks that we're going to go over, and these are tips and tricks of how to get that application looked at on the first audit and approved for in the first audit go around. So for new applications, we're looking at a couple different things. Your income document, so that's that income attestation form. When your tenant goes in, there's going to be a hyperlink in the document tab that they can click on and download that income document. They're going to need to fill that out, as I said, with all occupants that they've listed that are on that lease and that they've listed on their application that are over 18. If they have 0 income, they still need to be listed and they need to put that their income is 0. If they're not listed, it's going to get sent back to them and they're going to have to redo the income attestation form. The COVID hardship form, this is a big one. So this is one that we see a lot of times where there's missing information. On that COVID hardship form, there are several sections. There's an A and a B section, and there's check boxes. We need to make sure that your tenants are checking off sections A and B, and at the bottom, there's a place to print, sign, and date. If they're opening up as a PDF, they don't need to do a wet signature. They can do a type-in signature, a type-in name for printed name, and the date, and then they need to save that and upload that. So those are the things that sometimes get missed is the check boxes. And again, that photo ID, matching address, you're going to hear me say this over and over again. That's a big one. If they haven't updated their photo ID, we don't require them to go to DMV and get the photo up or the photo ID updated, but we will need a piece of mail with the matching address. And then we have a new document. So we recognize that there are some tenants that have had to use maybe a cosigner or somebody has moved out of the property and we are not able to get their income, even though they're listed on the lease as an occupant. We have an income or an occupant form that your tenant is able to complete that basically says that that person no longer lives in the property. And on those new applications, we also would like a rent ledger. So whether they're delinquent or they're current on their rent, we need to see a history of your tenant's payments. If you don't keep a ledger, or like, let's say your ledger is handwritten and it's kind of messy and only you know how to decipher it, that's not going to help your case move forward quickly. I would recommend that you go to our website and check out the ledger that we have there. You can download it and just fill it out. On our recertifications, so those recerts are for your tenants that have already gotten assistance and they're looking for their next 3 months of assistance. Again, we're going to need updated income documents. So those income documents need to be resubmitted every 90 days. So make sure when your tenant's coming up for a recertification and they submit their application, ask them, have you updated your income form? You're going to need to make sure that you give us a rent ledger. We understand they may be on time with their rent, but we want to see that. We also recognize that some of you landlords may have assessed additional fees over the last time that we paid you. So they may have had some water bills that have come in. If you charge them for, monthly electric and that gets paid by you, and your lease says that the tenant is responsible, you may have included that on your ledger. So we're going to want to see what is due. And for your tenants that are asking for rent and utility assistance, what we will see is when they ask for the next 3 months, they don't update a new utility bill, and we have to reach out to them and ask for a utility bill. So you want to ask your tenant, are you requesting utility assistance? If you are, make sure you update your utility bill. And then again, that occupant form. In the last 90 days since you recertified, if somebody has moved out, we're going to make sure that we get that income or that occupant form. And then for our security deposit cases, we recognize that you may not have a lease yet because the tenant has not moved in and they haven't given you any money. We have a lot of landlords that are not comfortable getting a lease signed until they get that security deposit. So we will allow you to upload a welcome letter in place of the lease, or if you have a lease, you can upload that lease. That welcome letter is going to need to include some important information. It's going to need to include your information as the landlord, the property address, the tenant's name, and it's also going to need to include what we need to pay. So what is the rent? What is the monthly rent? If they're moving in several days into the month, what the prorated amount of that first month's rent is going to be. We're also going to need to know what the security deposit is. And we're also going to ask you for a ledger because that's a tab. Since you're not going to have a ledger, you can upload a letter that basically says that there is no ledger yet because this is a security deposit new tenant move in. Or you can upload the welcome letter where it says ledger. So our statuses. So we get a lot of questions as to what statuses are. So the main status is that, you as a landlord, you're really you want to see that it's been paid, but there's a process to that. So you may see approved for payment. This means that your application was approved. And in this status, it's about 2 weeks before you would probably receive payment maximum. I do want to say if you've requested a check, it may take a bit longer. As we say, we like it to be 2 weeks, but we have no control over the mail system. And sometimes we see that those checks can lag behind. And I just saw an email from a landlord or from our system where they're saying allow 30 days for that check to be received. The paid status. So it will flip to paid after we've sent that to the bank and the payment is cleared. This will prompt an auto email to you with details of what your payment's going to be. If you see that your case is denied, that's primarily because of eligibility. It can be appealed. It means that we've looked at the case, we've denied it because we've figured out that they don't qualify. But if your tenant feels that they do qualify, we can relook at that case. If we say denied, no appeal allowed, this means that basically there's a couple things that could have happened. Either your tenant has not responded to our outreach calls, and we do at least 4 outreach attempts over 7 days. That tenant can then submit a new case to restart, or it's a duplicate. So you may see denied, no appeal allowed because you may have submitted a case and your tenant may have submitted a case. And so we're going to deny one of those because we only want one case in process. Or sometimes we have a tenant that gets anxious and they submit 3 or 4 cases at the same time. The applied status means that once the tenant has gone in, they've applied on your side, it will say invited if we're waiting for the tenant to respond. And if the tenant has created the case, it will say invited or in progress. That means that either party has applied. And we can't review it until either the landlord or tenant has completed their portion. That in progress means that it's in review. We have a 2 review process. We have an auditor that reviews the file first, and they will reach out to either you or your tenant if there are documents that are needed. And then once that auditor is done reviewing it, it gets flipped over to a supervisor. That supervisor does the final review. And if they need additional documents, they'll either reach out to you or the tenant directly, or they'll send it back to auditor to ask for those documents. If you do see that it's in call outreach completed, that means something's wrong. Something was required and we didn't get it, and we need that, or it's going to be denied. Um, if it's assigned to DSHA auditor, that means that you need to contact one of the DSHA internal staff. You'll see that towards the end of the presentation, because it means that there's some additional touch points that we need to confirm with either you or your tenant. So this is kind of a print screen that I like to show here. So if you look over on the left-hand side, this is kind of what you as the landlord see. So what you want to see is you want to see blue checks. Blue checks are good. That means that you've kind of done everything that you need to do. The yellow boxes or those yellow triangles or where additional information is needed. But if you look at the underneath the red writing where you can see like in progress, um, past due rent. This is kind of walking you through each of your cases. So in progress, those are the things that we talked about where it's in progress. We've just gotten the application and it's kind of just started. Once the landlord and tenant have done what they're supposed to do on both sides, it's now submitted. If we see the not started, this means that somebody hasn't done what they're supposed to do and we're still kind of waiting on a document or it hasn't been submitted. All right. And then if you look to the right and you see these applied, denied, no appeal allowed, those are again what we just spoke about. If you see these little statuses, those are what we talked about. And if it's again denied, no appeal allowed, you're going to need to reach out to your tenant and find out what's going on. You can also see on here what past due rent is and what the monthly rent is. You're going to want to make sure that all of the information on here is correct. So internal DSHA staff. So we have internal staff here, and we also have some of the contact information that we spoke about in our other slide. So for application status questions, so those are basic questions where you kind of want to know what the status of the application is. You're going to want to reach out to that call center, again, that 866-935-0407. If you have payment questions, you can contact the call center as well. If they're not able to answer your question directly, they have the ability to escalate it to the appropriate party. If you're having issues with your login and password, you can contact the call center as well. Payment questions. So as landlords, if you've submitted applications and they're older, prior to September of 2021, you can email Brenda Stevenson. She's one of our DSHA program specialists, and she'll be able to get you payment information. If you have questions on cases that have eviction filings or upcoming court dates, Reem Alicia is your point of contact. So I will say, if you have a case and you have court documents, we're going to need to see a copy of those court documents. So my recommendation is that you go into your case and you upload those court documents, and then you send an email to Reem that says, this is the date of our court hearing. We need to get this escalated. And Brenda Stevenson also is our point of contact or your point of contact for our larger landlords and property managers that have like questions about, multiple tenants. And she can answer utility questions as well. And so other program issues, if nothing fits into any of these buckets, you can always reach out to me, Marva, and my email is on here as well. So now's the fun time. Lori, I'm going to turn it back over to you for the Q&A.
Yes, thank you very much, Marva. Really appreciate all the detail you include in every presentation. And I will quickly go over the what's next so that you can have a chance to catch your breath because that was a great presentation. So again, thank you all for attending. Before we hop into our question and answer, I just want to quickly remind you that a lot of this information, including the PowerPoint and the Q&A we're going to dive into, will be sent in a follow-up email. and then we will have another landlord call the week of July 18th. And you can visit the website DE COVID Housing Help. If you go to landlord information, more details about registration and what time that call will take place will be available soon. So with that being said, I will hop right into the question and answer. We do have some that were submitted via registration, but if you would also like to add your questions into the chat or Q&A, we welcome you to do so now. Okay, so our first question is, what is the greatest length of time a resident can apply for assistance?
So that's a great question, Lori. So our program right now is an 18-month program. And like I said, we can pay delinquent rent and future rent in 3-month increments. So if you have a tenant that is delinquent by 10 months, they can apply for that delinquent rent of 10 months, or you can apply on their behalf. And then we can pay their current month's rent, which now would be July, and then we could pay the next 3 months of rent with a maximum of 18 months. So once they hit that 18 months and they've maxed out, then the program, they would be done with the program.
Okay, thank you. We have the next question is from a tenant. I am a tenant and my leasing office contact for DEHAP applications has changed. I've updated my part of the application but cannot update the landlord's page. Why is that and what should I do?
So they should be able to go into their application to the landlord tab. And at the top, they'll see a little area where they can open up, I think it's a little pencil, I can't recall, but I think it's a pencil. It will allow you to click on that and then you can change that information. If they're not able to change that information, then they could reach out to us internally. They can reach out to me and I can try to change that on my side.
Okay, awesome. Next question. I'm a landlord and haven't received an application from my tenant or the DEHAP program. What should I do?
So that's kind of a layered question. So my first question to the landlord would be, do you know if the tenant has submitted an application? I would recommend that they contact the call center if they, and see if an application has been submitted, or really talk to their tenant and get the case number. If the tenant has submitted an application and the landlord hasn't seen something on their side, my suspicions is that the tenant may have not included the correct email address for that landlord. So that's where I would start.
Okay. Next question. How long does it take for a decision on approval?
Another excellent question. And I wish I had like a really simple answer for that. So it's really all dependent on how well that application is submitted. We went through a whole bunch of requirements. So hopefully like your tenant is submitting the application with everything that we need. So it just kind of depends on how long it takes for the tenant to get us everything we need and the landlord to get us everything we need. If the case is being reviewed and everything is there, then it can be a relatively quick process. If documents are needed, it can take longer because we've now need to contact either you or the tenant and ask for updated documents. And then we have to wait for that tenant to upload those documents and then for that case to come back into queue to be reviewed.
Okay. My application has been stalled for about 6 months. What should I do? And I think you touched on this a little bit in the previous question, but um, maybe just additional information for anyone who has had an application that has not been approved and has been stalled for some reason.
Yeah, so I think the first thing would be to contact the call center and have the call center kind of review the case notes to find out if there's something missing. And then we looked at those statuses. If it's in DSHA auditor status, they're going to want to contact DSHA to kind of find out what's going on. If it's in call outreach completed, that really means that we're waiting on documents from either the landlord or the tenant. and we haven't been able to move forward with review because there's missing docs. Again, it could be something as simple as the landlord didn't click submit or the tenant didn't click submit. So there's a number of things that could be the reason for this. But I would start with that tenant first going into the application, reviewing each tab, making sure their documents are updated, the forms are complete, and then contacting the call center to kind of find out if there's something else.
Okay, thank you. I see this individual has additional questions, and I'm just going to say we will follow up with you offline. Okay, so in terms of next question, I'm having trouble getting what I need from the call center. I call, they say everything is there, and yet my application still has no movement. What do you suggest?
So if this is, I don't know if this is a tenant question or a landlord question.
Mm-hmm.
So either way, if I was the landlord, I would connect with my tenant to make sure the tenant hasn't received an email requesting documents that they have not submitted. I would also ask, since this is a landlord chat
Mm-hmm.
today, I will come from the perspective that you are the landlord. Have a conversation with your tenant that the tenant has uploaded everything that is needed and that their documents, that their income documents, they're within 90 days, that all adults are listed on that income document, that they've looked at their COVID hardship form, and that everything is complete on that, and that they've actually hit the submit button and submitted it. If there's issues outside of that, then I would again contact the call center and ask them to escalate that case because it's been a period of time, and like from both standpoints,
Mm-hmm.
you don't see that there's anything wrong, so you just need a little bit more clarity.
Okay, awesome. Um, few housing related questions. So, where can I find the Delaware landlord or tenant laws? I can start on this one. So, the best place to look for laws in relation to landlord or tenant issues is the Fraud and Consumer Protection Division, as well as the Consumer Protection Unit at the Attorney General's office. That is the best place to go if you are having a landlord tenant issue or are curious about landlord tenant laws. Next question. Are there going to be other housing programs available? I'd like to own my own home. Are there any programs to help or an incentive to do this? So, yes, this call is for DEHAP rental assistance. If you are looking for home ownership opportunities or to learn about our home ownership program, which provides down payment and closing cost assistance, you would visit the Kiss Your Landlord Goodbye website, and I'll also put that in the chat. It is through this program in which you can achieve home ownership. But thank you for joining us today. Okay, any other questions from the audience? I will give it 30 seconds and you can place them in the Q&A or chat box. Okay, so again, we will be sending up a follow-up email with this PowerPoint, the recording, as well as some answers to questions that are more specific. We'll be reaching out on an individual level. I want to thank you all for joining us again today and hope to see you in 2 weeks for the next call. Thank you.